Ryan's office revenge. They stole the division I built from scratch with a single sentence. I smiled and congratulated the 28-year-old nephew, while the CEO sighed in relief, thinking he had silenced me. They failed to realize that they had inherited a title, not the network of trust I controlled. Influence cannot be transferred like furniture. My next move was quiet, but it would cost them weeks of sleep and nearly cost me my life. My name is Scott Palmer. I'm 55 years old, and for the last 15 years, I've given every working hour of my life to Pinnacle Industrial Systems. I sat in that leather conference chair, hands folded on the mahogany table, feeling my chest tighten as the air conditioning hummed against the silence. The stress had been building for months, and my doctor's warnings about blood pressure echoed in my mind. There were 12 of us in the boardroom, the inner circle of a company that dominated the mid-Atlantic supply chain market. But at this moment, the room felt less like a place of business and more like an execution chamber. Mark Stevens, our CEO, stood at the head of the table. He was a man who believed that fear was better motivation than respect. He adjusted his silk tie, cleared his throat, and delivered the sentence that effectively ended my career with the casual indifference of someone ordering lunch. From next week, this division will be handed over to my nephew, Brad Stevens. The words hit me like a physical blow. My chest tightened further, and I felt that familiar flutter in my heart that had been happening more frequently since my daughter Sarah started medical school. The tuition bills were $60,000 a year, and my ex-wife's alimony payments left little room for error. At 55, with 10 years until retirement, I couldn't afford to lose this job. But I'd spent 15 years training myself to show no emotion in corporate battles, and I wasn't about to break that streak now. Brad Stevens was sitting directly across from me, looking like he'd just inherited a Porsche. He was 28 years old with an MBA that was still warm from the printer. He'd joined the company 8 months ago in some strategy role that mostly involved him wandering around the break room and attending high-level meetings where he contributed nothing but interruptions. The smirk on his face told me everything I needed to know about his character. To understand the magnitude of what was being stolen from me, you need to understand what the partner network division looked like 15 years ago when I started. It wasn't the gleaming high-revenue engine that Brad was drooling over. It was a graveyard where careers went to die. A chaotic mess of broken contracts, angry suppliers, and a supply chain so fractured that Pinnacle was bleeding cash trying to fulfill basic orders. When Mark hired me, I wasn't brought in as a rising star. I was brought in as a janitor to clean up someone else's mess. I remember the interview vividly. Mark didn't look at my resume, showing 8 years of Navy logistics experience. He looked out the window, bored, tapping a gold pen against the glass. "You have 6 months," Mark had said, finally turning to look at me with cold, dead eyes. "If you can't stop the bleeding by the end of the second quarter, we're closing the division and outsourcing the entire supply chain overseas. Don't expect miracles. Just fix it or pack your things." I didn't argue. I took the job because I knew something Mark didn't. My Navy background had taught me that systems only work when every component trusts the other components. In submarine logistics, if the supply chain breaks down, people die. That mindset served me well in civilian business. For the first 2 years, I barely saw the inside of my own office. While other executives were golfing, I was driving through the industrial heartland of America in a rental car. I went to rusty manufacturing plants in Ohio, sweltering warehouses in Alabama, and family-owned fabrication shops in rural Pennsylvania. I didn't whine and dine these people at country clubs. I met them where they worked. I remember the day that changed everything. Dan Sullivan owned a critical steel fabrication plant that supplied our chassis components. He'd refused to take calls from Pinnacle for 3 weeks because the previous director had stiffed him on a payment. When I walked into his greasy office, he looked ready to throw me out physically. "Get off my property before I call the sheriff," he growled, his hands permanently stained with grease and decades of honest work. I didn't retreat. I sat down and placed a personal check on his desk for $5,000, money I couldn't really afford, with Sarah's college applications pending and my divorce settlement still bleeding me dry. "The company wire is stuck in approval," I told him. "But I know you have payroll to meet Friday. If you trust me, I'll make sure the full corporate payment hits your account Monday morning. If not, cash that check and I'll eat the loss." Dan stared at the check, then at me. He saw a man putting his own financial security on the line for a principal. He tore up my check and poured me coffee that tasted like motor oil. The corporate payment arrived Monday as promised. Dan never missed a deadline for me again. That was how I built it, brick by brick, handshake by handshake. I reconstructed a network of 18 core partners from the ashes of corporate arrogance. My strategy was revolutionary in its simplicity. Radical transparency. If we were going to be late with a payment, I called 3 days in advance to explain why. If we screwed up a specification, I owned it and paid for the rework out of my budget. I created one unbreakable rule. Never promise what you can't deliver. When Scott Palmer said the trucks would be there at noon, they were there at noon. When Scott Palmer said the contract would be renewed, the paperwork was already in the mail. In an industry full of lying executives and over-promising sales reps, my word became gold. But the executives never understood that the machine wasn't automated. It ran on the fuel of personal relationships. They saw green lights on a dashboard. They didn't see the thousands of invisible connections I maintained every day. They thought the partners stayed because Pinnacle was prestigious. They were wrong. The partners stayed because I answered the phone at 2 a.m. when their shipments were delayed by blizzards. In 15 years, Mark never once said thank you. He never acknowledged that our healthy margins existed because I'd negotiated a price lock with our aluminum supplier 2 years before the market spiked. He only looked at profit reports. To him, my division was a vending machine. Put in a coin, get a product. He had no concept of the delicate mechanics inside the box. The warning signs had been there for months, but I'd chosen to ignore them. The most jarring came exactly 3 months before the boardroom execution. On a Tuesday morning at Murphy's Diner near the Freight District, I was nursing black coffee and reviewing shipping manifests when I heard a familiar voice from the booth behind me. "Rough morning for the logistics sector, isn't it, Scott?" I turned to see Tony Richardson, CEO of Harbor Point Components, our biggest competitor. We'd never spoken socially, only exchanged polite nods at industry conferences. He was impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly alimony payment. "Are you stalking me, Tony?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Or is the coffee at the Ritz not up to your standards?" Tony slid into my booth uninvited, his expression serious. "I like to keep an eye on talent, especially when that talent is being wasted." He leaned forward. "How long do you think you have left before Mark finds a way to push you out?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. "That's ridiculous. I just delivered the best quarter in company history." Tony smiled, but it was a sad smile. "I've been in this industry 25 years, Scott. I know Mark Stevens. He's a builder of empires, but he's also a paranoid king. He uses people like you, the architects, the fixers who get their hands dirty. You pour the concrete, install the wiring, make the structure sound. But once the building is finished, once the risk is gone and the money flows..." He paused to sip his coffee. He doesn't want a builder anymore. He wants a caretaker. More importantly, he wants control. My chest tightened again. The stress was literally killing me. My doctor had warned me about the irregular heartbeat, prescribed medication I couldn't afford to fill regularly because of Sarah's medical school costs. People like you know too much, Tony continued. You know where the bodies are buried. You know the success is yours, not his. That terrifies men like Mark. And he has family now. That Nephew's been sniffing around for months. He slid a piece of paper across the table, his personal number. If I'm wrong, throw that away. But if I'm right, you'll need options. 2 weeks. Later, the ground shifted. I was in the break room making coffee, my hands shaking slightly from the new blood pressure medication, when Mark walked in, humming. He was in high spirits, which was rare for a Tuesday. Big news coming soon, Scott, he said, beaming like a proud father. Brad's graduating next month. MBA, top of his class. The boy has potential. Real potential. He needs something substantial, something with teeth. He needs a division that runs itself so he can focus on strategy. A division that runs itself. My coffee mug nearly slipped from my trembling fingers. That was exactly how my division looked from the outside. A self-sustaining profit engine that I'd spent 15 years building to appear effortless. That night, I sat in my small apartment going through medical bills and college tuition statements. Sarah's second-year costs had increased to $65,000. My mother, now 78, needed assistance with her arthritis medication that insurance barely covered. The weight of it all pressed down on my chest like a steel plate. The weeks leading up to my execution weren't filled with sabotage. I'm not an amateur. Instead, I prepared the most thorough legal and procedural exit strategy imaginable. Late at night, when the office was empty and my heart wasn't racing from stress, I pulled the physical binders for all 18 major partner contracts. I was looking for one specific clause, the relationship continuity provision. In plain English, it stated that preferential pricing, priority shipping, and extended payment windows were contingent upon maintaining a stable relationship with a designated Pinnacle representative. If that representative was removed, suppliers had the right to initiate a 30-day review period and potentially renegotiate or terminate without penalty. Mark had signed these contracts years ago without reading them, just happy to lock in low prices. He'd assumed I would always be there. He never imagined voluntarily cutting off his own head. Next, I created the Supplier Council, monthly video conferences where partners could voice concerns directly to leadership. I presented it to Mark as modernization to help incoming management. Great idea, Scott, he said, barely glancing at the proposal. Set it up. Brad needs to look engaged. I smiled. I'd just built Brad a stage where he could showcase his incompetence to our most important clients. Finally, I protected myself. I hired an employment attorney with money I scraped together by skipping my heart medication for 2 weeks. We sat in his office as I laid out the situation. They're replacing me with the CEO's nephew, I explained. When things go wrong, and they will, Mark will blame me. He'll say I sabotaged the handover. The lawyer nodded grimly. You need an impenetrable paper trail. From now on, every conversation gets followed up with an email. Every directive gets documented. Build a fortress of evidence. I took that advice to heart. For my final weeks, I became a bureaucratic machine. When Mark told me to rush approval for Brad's friend's trucking company, bypassing safety audits, I sent a confirmation email. Per our hallway conversation, you've directed me to expedite Velocity Trans logistics without standard compliance checks. Please confirm I should proceed. Mark's reply came in 5 minutes. Just get it done. I printed that email. I saved digital copies. I forwarded it to a private server. When Brad missed critical meetings because of strategy lunches, I documented every absence with timestamps and impact assessments. By the time that final boardroom meeting arrived, I had a complete dossier proving I'd done everything humanly possible to ensure Brad's success. If the network collapsed when I left, it would prove definitively that I wasn't holding a sledgehammer. I was the load-bearing wall. The first day of my unemployment felt like drowning in slow motion. I woke up at 6 a.m. out of habit, my body still programmed for the commute, but there was nowhere to go. The silence in my apartment was deafening, just the hum of the refrigerator and the weight of unpaid bills stacked on my kitchen counter. Sarah's tuition payment was due in 2 weeks. My mother's prescription refills couldn't wait much longer. I made coffee with shaking hands and sat staring at my company phone, which I'd kept to watch the demolition unfold. At 8:30 a.m., it lit up. Brad's assistant. I let it ring. 2 minutes later, the director of operations called. He never contacted anyone unless trucks were literally on fire. I watched his name flash and fade. At 9 a.m., Mark's name appeared on the screen. The phone buzzed angrily against the granite countertop, a mechanical scream that filled my kitchen. I could picture him in his corner office, red-faced and desperate, finally understanding that the woman he'd discarded was the only one who could save him. My hand hovered over the device. I could answer. I could tell him which files to open, which numbers to call. I could save my own financial skin. Instead, I powered down the phone and watched the screen go black. Around noon, my personal phone buzzed with a text from Tony Richardson. 4 partners triggered review clauses this morning. The dam is breaking. 4 partners, over 20% of the core network. They'd waited exactly until the official handover to pull their support. I knew those letters would be polite, professional, and devastating. They weren't breaking contracts. They were simply freezing business until they felt comfortable with new leadership. And they didn't feel comfortable with Brad. The next call nearly destroyed me. Lisa Martinez, my former logistics coordinator, was sobbing. "Scott, please, you have to help me. Everything's falling apart. The dashboard is completely red." Her panic cut through me like a blade. Lisa was a single mother with 2 kids, just like my situation 15 years ago. She couldn't afford to lose this job any more than I could afford to stay unemployed. "What's happening?" I asked, though I already knew. "It's Velocity Trans, the carrier Brad brought in. They missed the pickup in Ohio. 2 tons of raw materials are sitting on a dock, and the factory manager is threatening to shut down the production line. I tried calling our backup carriers, but they all say they're under contract review and can't take emergency orders." My chest tightened. The dominoes were falling exactly as I'd predicted. "Where's Brad?" "He's locked in the conference room with legal, screaming about breach of contract. He keeps saying we can just Google another trucking company. Scott, he has no idea what he's doing, and people are talking about layoffs." The guilt hit me like a physical blow. This was the cost of my revenge. Good people like Lisa paying the price for Mark's arrogance and Brad's incompetence. My hands trembled as I gripped the phone. "Lisa, listen carefully," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Document everything. Send an email to Brad and copy Jeff Morrison in finance. State the facts. Carrier missed pickup. Backup options unavailable due to contract reviews. Production impact imminent. Don't offer solutions. Just report the problem." "But the production line will stop," she cried. "Let it stop. If you fix this, they'll never learn that they broke it. Protect yourself. Write the email." I hung up and immediately felt the familiar flutter in my chest, the irregular heartbeat that had been getting worse under stress. I fumbled for my medication, realizing I'd been rationing the pills to save money. The irony was bitter. The stress of losing my job was literally killing me, but I couldn't afford the medicine to manage it. That evening, as I sat reviewing my dwindling bank account, my phone rang. It was Mark, and his voice was pure desperation disguised as rage. "You manipulative bastard," he snarled. "You poisoned the well before you left. I have half our partners threatening to walk and production lines shutting down." "What did you tell them?" I sat in my kitchen, looking at overdue medical bills and my mother's prescription receipts. "I told them nothing, Mark. I didn't have to. You handed my life's work to someone who thinks logistics is just moving boxes around. You're going to fix this," he demanded. "I'll pay you 25% more. Same title. Just make it stop." For a moment, I considered it. The money would solve my immediate problems: Sarah's tuition, my mother's care, my own medical needs. But then I thought about the 15 years I'd given this company, the health I'd sacrificed, the relationships I'd built while Mark collected bonuses. "No," I said quietly, "but I have a counter-proposal." The silence on the other end was deafening. "Palmer Consulting," I continued. "You hire my firm to manage the partner network. I work for the board, not for you. My people get guaranteed positions and better salaries. We handle everything: negotiations, relationships, crisis management." "That's extortion," Mark spat. "That's the market rate for competence," I replied. "You can accept it, or you can explain to the board why you leveraged my division as collateral for a $180 million loan without telling them." The phone went silent. I'd done my homework. Through industry contacts, I'd discovered Mark's desperate gamble, using our stable supply chain as security for a speculative tech acquisition. If the partners walked, the bank would call the loan immediately. "How did you—" Mark started. 15 years of building relationships, Mark. People tell me things. They trust me. You never understood that trust can't be inherited or transferred. It has to be earned. I hung up and sat in the darkness of my apartment, feeling my heart racing dangerously. The next 48 hours would determine whether I'd saved my future or destroyed it completely. The emergency board meeting was called for Thursday morning. I woke up with chest pains so severe I nearly called an ambulance. Instead, I took 2 of my rationed heart pills and put on my best suit. The charcoal one I'd worn to my father's funeral. The one that made me look like someone who belonged in boardrooms. The Pinnacle headquarters looked the same from the outside, but walking through those glass doors felt like entering enemy territory. The receptionist's eyes widened when she saw me. Word had spread. I was either the savior coming to rescue the company or the executioner returning to finish the job. Carol Thompson, the board chairwoman, was waiting in the executive conference room. She looked exhausted, older than her 62 years. Mark sat at the opposite end of the table. But when he saw me, his desperation flickered behind forced bravado. "I knew you'd come crawling back," Mark said, but his voice lacked conviction. I didn't sit down. I stood behind the chair, opened my briefcase, and placed 3 files on the polished mahogany table. My hands were steadier than they'd been in weeks. "I'm here to present a proposal from Palmer Consulting," I said. "We're offering a service agreement to manage your partner network exclusively." Mark laughed, but it sounded hollow. "You think we're going to outsource our core operations to a one-man show?" "The alternative," I said quietly, "is bankruptcy." I opened the first file. 4 major partners have suspended operations. Your retention rate is below the loan covenant threshold. The bank can call your $180 million debt immediately. Carol picked up the documents, her face growing pale as she read. "Mark, you used our supply chain as collateral without board approval?" "It was a strategic opportunity," Mark stammered. "The tech acquisition would have bankrupted us," Carol cut him off. She looked at me with new respect. "What are your terms, Scott?" "My firm takes over all partner relationships. I report to the board, not to Mark. My former team gets guaranteed positions with Palmer Consulting at 30% salary increases, and Mark steps down immediately." The room went silent. I could hear my own heartbeat, irregular but strong. This was the moment everything would be decided. Carol looked at the other board members. All in favor of accepting Palmer Consulting's proposal? Every hand went up except Mark's. All in favor of requesting Mark Stevens' immediate resignation? Again, every hand rose. Mark stared around the room in disbelief, seeing his empire crumble in real time. "Security will escort you out," Carol said gently but firmly. As Mark was led away, he stopped at the door and looked back at me. "You destroyed everything I built." "No, Mark," I said, feeling a strange calm wash over me. "I just stopped holding it together for you." 6 months later, I was sitting in my new office. Nothing fancy, just a converted warehouse space with good light and honest furniture. Palmer Consulting had grown to 12 employees, all making more money than they'd ever seen at Pinnacle. The phone rang constantly with new business. My irregular heartbeat had stabilized once I could afford consistent medication. But the real measure of success came that Tuesday morning when Dan Sullivan called. "Scott, I wanted you to hear this first," Dan said, his voice warm with something I'd rarely heard in corporate America. Genuine affection. "My son just graduated with his engineering degree. You know what I told him?" "What's that, Dan?" "I told him to find someone like you to work for. Someone who builds things that last. Someone whose word means something. You didn't just save my business, Scott. You showed my kid what integrity looks like in action." After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and thought about that moment in the boardroom 15 years earlier when I'd put my own $5,000 on Dan's desk. I'd been broke then, just like I was 6 months ago. The difference wasn't the money, it was the principle behind it. Last month, Brad Stevens called me. I almost didn't answer. "Scott, I wanted to thank you," he said, his voice completely different from the entitled kid I remembered. "What you did to me, it was the best thing that ever happened to me." He was working as a logistics coordinator in Baltimore now, making $45,000 a year and learning the business from the warehouse floor up. "I thought I deserved respect because of my last name," he continued. "You taught me that respect has to be earned. I'm earning it now, one pallet at a time." Even Mark had found his level. I heard through industry contacts that he was selling commercial real estate in Florida, making about 1/3 of his old salary. He'd applied for several CEO positions, but found that word travels fast in our industry. Nobody wanted a leader who'd gamble with the company's foundation. The hardest lesson came when Pinnacle finally collapsed completely 8 months after I left. They'd laid off 60% of their workforce, including people I'd considered friends. I managed to hire some of them, but I couldn't save everyone. The weight of that still keeps me awake some nights. Carol Thompson stopped by last week to tell me something that changed how I see the whole story. "The board's biggest regret," she said, "wasn't losing Mark or even the financial losses. It was not recognizing that you were the real asset all along. We spent years measuring everything except the thing that actually mattered: trust." As I drove home that evening, past the industrial plants and warehouses that had shaped my career, I realized something profound. For 15 years, I'd thought success meant climbing the corporate ladder, accumulating titles and salary increases. I'd measured my worth by Mark's approval and the company's profits. But sitting in my own office, with my own employees, serving clients who called me directly because they trusted my word, I understood the truth. Real success isn't about what you can take from a system. It's about what you can build that survives without you having to hold it together with your bare hands. The greatest victory isn't destroying what someone tries to steal from you. It's proving they never really owned it in the first place. Trust, competence, and integrity aren't assets that can be inherited or transferred. They're currencies that must be earned one relationship, one kept promise, one moment of authentic leadership at a time.